everyone, and welcome to another episode of Church Coffee, Christianity, Conservatism, and Culture. My name's Rob, and today we have the Vice Mayor of Charlottesville City on, Brian Pinkston. Vice Mayor Pinkston, welcome on.
Thank you so much for having me, Rob. I really appreciate it. It's nice to meet you, and it's fantastic that you do this podcast. I didn't know about it.
Oh, thanks. First and foremost, how do you take your coffee? I assume a government official drinks copious amounts, but I've been wrong before.
You know, I'll take it pretty much any way it comes to me, but I prefer it with copious amounts of milk.
Heavy cream, milk, 2%.
Prefer heavy cream. I used to be like, I don't know, I hated coffee in college. It took me a while to acquire the taste, but once I did, I was like, I love coffee. Then I had this sort of like Southern macho thing going on where I couldn't put any, cream in it. It had to be black. And one day my wife said, try this with milk. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's so much better.
Give us a little story or biography of your life.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I was thinking through this, preparing for, because I'm from the Deep South, a town called Albany, Georgia. I grew up in a very deeply conservative milieu, both religiously, culturally, politically. We were fundamentalists, though we didn't know it, and we weren't harsh about it. We were just very intense religious folks, and my family still is. It also was Christian nationalist, and we didn't know that word either at the time, but we believed that, God had a place for America, and it was part of our job to, make that kind of a reality. So I grew up in that kind of culture, and I still love those people. For me, though, I was always a very reflective person, very curious. My dad always said that I always wanted to know why this is the case, why that's the case. And in my late teen years, I guess I was 17 or so, I just one summer, all of a sudden, when I was working, had experienced some really deep, intense intellectual doubts about everything, sort of the core things that Christian believers hold, everything from the person of Christ to the resurrection of Christ to the scripture to, what does Genesis 1 mean? All of this whole range of things, and just deep doubts. It took a long time. I was going to Georgia Tech. I went to Georgia Tech a few years after that, and it took me a while before I was even able to sort of say these are doubts and I shouldn't be afraid of them. Instead, I should ask questions about them. And so I went from that stage to studying a lot of Christian apologetics.
Do you have a favorite apologetic book, or one that maybe, or even one that you read and really liked and now perhaps have reassessed in your wise old age?
The standard is always C.S. Lewis, and I think sometimes nowadays he's dismissed as lightweight, but it's his, the heart that shines through his work. And for me, the book that was the most impactful was actually his autobiography, Surprised by Joy. I had read Mere Christianity and some of those books and loved the Narnia stories, but it was his autobiography that really captured me. It had a piece in there. He calls himself the most reluctant convert in all of England. But there was a piece in there about courage, where courage is not, no other virtue can survive except by accident. I read that book at a point in my life when I was going through these deep doubts and realizing that, my issue was that I was afraid to ask the questions and try to get answers. Might get an answer that, quote, I didn't like, but even if that were the case, it was still worth pursuing. So yes, C.S. Lewis. Yeah, I went to Georgia Tech. I'm an engineer. I've spent my career as a project manager. My first job out of tech, actually, I was a co-op student. I don't know if people know what that means, but basically you work a quarter, go to school a quarter or semester or whatever. And I worked in a huge manufacturing plant that Procter & Gamble has in Georgia, in Albany, my home, making Charmin toilet paper and Bounty paper towels. And it was just a great first job. I mean, working in a manufacturing facility like that, it was just literally seeing all the gears and the steam and the pipes and everything. It was really fascinating. But I always knew I wanted to go back and study theology and philosophy. That was just a burning passion of mine. And in my late 30s, my wife and our two little kids at the time, and our third one was born there. We moved out to Los Angeles and went to a school called Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. It had at the time, probably still does, one of the leading evangelical Christian conservative philosophy programs. And it was a really great experience for me. It sort of a way station for me as I went from a, I'll call it a more rigid view of faith to a more expansive one.
Are you a fan of Alvin Plantinga?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. But then I knew that I wanted to get a PhD in philosophy. I just had this learning and education, knowing as much as I can has always been like this deep drive for me. And so we came here to the area in 2004. When we first moved here, I didn't make enough money to live in the city. So I lived up in Greene County, made the commute every day from 2004 to 2012. I got a job working in facilities management, which is similar to what I do now. It's sort of a descendant of that original job. And so I worked full time for most of that time. We were raising our kids, and then I was working on a dissertation. So it took me a long time. It took like 8 years. I did my dissertation on a late medieval, early modern scholastic philosopher called Francisco Suarez. Because so much of what he wrote was not translated, it was in Latin. I had to figure out, I wish I could say that I could just pick up a book in Latin now and read it. But at one point I could, but it was always more of a decoding kind of thing. So it took me a long time to get my PhD. By the time I had gotten through a PhD program, my intellectual beliefs and my faith commitments and all of that had kind of been jumbled up. I call philosophy like metaphysical solvent. You take your ideas in, and if you sit around a seminar table with a bunch of really bright people for long enough, and you hear people that you respect who have very different views than you do, the word that I'll use is you just end up with a level of intellectual tolerance of people who see the world differently than you do, and respect for people that have landed in a different place than you have on a particular topic. And so it was just it was very, very hard and very, very long, but for me, it was important. And so in 2012, I finally finished. I was in my early 40s by that point. So it was too late in life, really, for me to try to become a philosophy professor, which had been my goal when I was in my 20s. I mean, it's hard enough to just find a job as a philosopher, let alone find one where you think you can end up, paying for a family. My kids were middle school then. And so, we stayed here and tried to make a life. Moved from Greene County into the city because I was tired of the commute. And I also knew there was a lot more just about life in the city that I wanted myself and my wife and my kids to participate in.
And now we will take a break to hear a word from our sponsor. Today's sponsor is Rose Electric. Rose Electric's primary mission is your comfort, and doing so honestly. Rose Electric has been providing customers with solutions in Charlottesville, Albemarle County, and the surrounding communities since 2023. Rose Electric offers the advanced service, repair, and installation for all your home electrical and smart home technology, and they have a foundational knowledge and experience that comes from years of service in the Charlottesville Albemarle community. I have personally used Liam Brennan for my quick home fix, and the cost was within the quoted price, and he arrived on time. I highly recommend Rose Electric. More information is found in the show notes. Now, back to our show.
Moved here in 2015. My sort of relation
moved into the city, correct?
Into the city, yeah. So we've been in Central Virginia since 2004, but into the city in 2015. Yeah, and a lot of interesting things happened that year. I had really grown disenchanted with the American church, the sort of evangelicalism that I had been a part of and even connected with since we lived in Virginia. I really, I still believed in the creeds, for example, but I was I just was very, very, I was going through what they call, you've heard this phrase, deconstruction. Deconstruction to reconstruct is what I hope to do. But in any event, I was just not sure about church. Through some friends, found out about All Souls Charlottesville, and that's where we go now. It's just been a really great place for me. The pastor that was there before, Win Collier, he's now moved on, but he just, I don't know, his way of engaging with faith was something that I was able to come home to, I guess. It was very interesting when we first started going to church there. One of the things that they do is we read sections from the lectionary as part of the liturgy. And I had grown up just bathed in scripture, and it had been so long since I had heard scripture out loud in that way. And it was something that, brought me home in some ways. And anyway, so I've served as an elder at All Souls. I've moved on from that now, but it's been a great experience and a lovely community. And so for me, still sort of tying this all back into you said the little bio, and this is becoming a long bio, but I think that if a philosopher, or really anyone who wants to think well about the world, if it doesn't end up at some point into ethics or, lowercase p politics, where you're talking about the original sense of those terms about what it means for us to live in community with one another, if at some point you don't come back to that, then I don't think that your philosophical studies have gone far enough. And so for me, politically, I was moving, I had been, one of Bush's compassionate conservatives and all, I had found a way for me, and I don't know your politics or others, and I'm just stating my own, where I've come from. And I had just grown up believing that the Republican Party and the conservative movement was always going to be my home. And that just began to shift through my graduate studies. And I began to believe that what it meant for me to be authentic with my faith and my other philosophical commitments would not fit within that paradigm. And, for a person who's on city council in Charlottesville, a very liberal city, and I would say that I'm a pretty liberal person at this point in terms of those big labels. The first time I voted for a Democrat for president was Obama the second time. So I'm a relatively recent convert. As time moved on in those years, my views became, for to use these words, liberal or more towards the left or whatever. I thought I was moving towards something like centrism, but by the time I got to that mirage kind of disappeared. And it was like we had these kind of two binary choices, it felt like. But in 2016, I remember I was in New Orleans at a work conference, and that was when the first primaries were happening with the Republican Party at the time. And just seeing this figure, Donald Trump, who everyone had said, well, he's too extreme or whatever, just to see him sort of steamroll through the primaries and begin to see that whatever the Republican Party was at that time, it was not for me. And so when Trump won that November, I mean, it seems like such a long time ago now, and we're in the middle of another Trump administration, obviously. I just really took it hard and I think one of the reasons that I took it so hard was I felt like that Trumpism, or whatever this populist movement on the right was about, that it had taken advantage of people that I loved, my family, who couldn't, for whatever reason, find a way out of their political party to distance themselves from someone who didn't reflect their values. And I also felt that my faith had been co-opted by whatever this populist movement was. And so in 2016, that November, I just threw myself into anything I could do, good government type initiatives, anti-gerrymandering, I considered getting more involved in the activist wing of the party. But what I decided to do was to actually join the local Democratic Party. And people in Charlottesville often think that the party is like pulling all these switches behind the scenes. Oftentimes, the local party has a hard time meeting quorum. And, so I got involved and I became a precinct captain. I was later vice chair. And I say all these things to say that at a certain point, this was late 2018, I was in a room listening to people who were planning to run for city council that following spring. And these are names, Cena McGill, Lloyd, Michael, I'm trying to think whoever else. And I was like, you know what? I have a lot of respect for these people and I think they'd be really good, but I think I would be good too at this. And anyway, I decided to run that spring. And, I'm an introvert. I hate asking people to do things for me, but everything about running a campaign is asking people to do things for you, to give you money, to put a yard sign up or whatever. And it's putting yourself out there. And by the end of it, I really enjoyed it. And then I lost by 110 votes. And so I didn't think I'd run again. I wasn't planning to run again. But then in 2021, sort of in the middle of everything that was going there in February, Heather Hill called me one night and said, I'm not going to run again. And would you reconsider? And so I did, was successful. And anyway, that was 4 years ago.
And now we'll take a break with a word from our sponsor. Located just 10 minutes from the Virginia Horse Center, Primetime Equine specializes in providing premium, custom care for your retired horse. Regular full board care is also available. With 2 barns totaling 25 stalls with multiple hot-cold wash stalls, heated tack rooms, and 9 paddocks and fields, Primetime Equine welcomes all breeds and styles of riding. For more information, see the show notes. And now, back to the show. Thanks for that bio and actually anticipating 2 questions. So we've already moved ahead. What are some of your proudest accomplishments during your tenure? Almost 4 years. So what's your proudest accomplishment or accomplishments over these last 3.5 years?
Yeah, I think, I really, there's some big tangible things. Like I'm really proud of the middle school that we got done. Super proud of that. I came on board. And again, a lot of these things, obviously it's, you're one part of a larger team, but Juan and I came in at that moment where there was not the political will to spend the money. And part of the reason for that was there was some lack of clarity about the finances. It was like people, I feel like in the budget office, who I think are lovely people, I feel like they were kind of stuck in an older paradigm. And clearly our community wanted us to build this building, and we needed to figure it out. And so that was one of the things we got done. And again, very proud of it. A lot of the construction projects that will have happened, that I kind of got going and that will finish after I'm gone from city council. I'm proud of the jail project. A lot of people aren't happy with me about the jail project, but I feel like from whatever hat you want to put on, like caring for those in our community who are the least off. I mean, all of those sorts of lenses, that renovation needed to happen. I'm proud of the central water line, which will be going in soon, and annoying lots of people because it's going to be a major project. But that is something that will bring, 40 years from now, we'll have a reliable water system, in part because of that. I think the biggest thing, though, is just the fact that we walked into a really tough situation without rehashing everything that was going on at the time. It was even worse on the inside than on the outside, to be honest. You had city council, the folks that were still there in 2022, that January, who were really trying hard and had just been through a really, frankly, abusive period. And
they all 5 of them got put through quite a ringer.
And then
those 4 years.
On top of that, COVID, trying to govern the city during COVID. And so I'm really proud that I stood up, chose to help when I didn't have to. And I'm proud of the fact that the city, a lot of people think, well, everything was okay, and then 2017 happened, and then the wheels fell off. My own view is that the city had not been well managed for at least a decade before that. I'm not trying to judge people or criticize people, but we needed to move from kind of a pokey southern city government that takes care of potholes and stuff to one that, has a world-class university in it where people want us to be involved in a whole range of things. And the city government, quote unquote, bureaucracy was not set up to do that. And so the first thing we started doing on council is just modeling mutual respect, compassion, treating other well, acting in good faith and believing that others were acting in good faith. I'll never forget one of the first meetings I had with someone. They asked me, "Are you recording this meeting?" Like on my phone. And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Of course I'm not doing that. But that was the culture at the time. This was a person in the city, not someone on city council. But and then finding Sam Sanders, who's been amazing, but working with Sam behind the scenes to like let him know we've got his back, let him know that if there's something politically difficult, that we're not going to just belittle him, frankly, in front of the public, and we're going to do what we can to support him. And he's doing an amazing job, and it's not just him. These collective bargaining agreements and the fact that we now have a competitive pay scale, and we've got new HR managers, and we've got new deputy city mayor. All of these folks are going deep into the city government and really transforming it. And so that is something that I'm deeply proud of.
Listeners will know I'm the show obviously says conservative in the title. Mentioned briefly, I did not vote for Trump, but I was talking with another conservative friend, and normie take for government is provide basic social services and keep freedom being protected. Getting potholes filled is probably a lot more government as a local government's wheelhouse than a lot of big things, which just don't have the money. First and foremost, you just don't have the money for. And
right,
normies walking around downtown or driving around in the city can start getting frustrated.
Charlottesville is a progressive city. At least the Democratic electorate is progressive. People say, well, the public clearly wants us to do this or clearly wants us to do that. Like when the Gaza vote came up, it's clear we've got all these people to sign this petition. It's like, I'm very loath to say I know what the city wants about any given topic, because oftentimes neighbors don't know each other's views and so on. But it's certainly been a theme for a while in the city. And my sense, at least with all the emails that I see and the comments that I hear from folks, people in Charlottesville have high expectations for the government, and sometimes it's like, to your point, we're doing a lot in the space of housing. That's a great example. We have to use this phrase of punching above our weight class. We are, and it's a lot of money, and I fully support it. We, could and should do more, but from my view. But on the other hand, it is a huge issue, and we can do some things, but we can't do everything. And it is remarkable when people will come down, like there was the shooting that happened in Orangedale, July 4th. And people came down to us, and it's like folks want to come into city council, and it's like if they talk to the 5 people there, that somehow that makes some sort of mystical connection with the whole community. And we're representing the community, but not always perfectly. But the point I'm trying to make about that is, folks were asking us, you've got to stop these shootings, you've got to help our youth, you've got to do all these things. And we need to help with those things at local government. But to your point, we can't do it all. And sometimes the expectations that people have about local government and city officials, it's just not realistic.
That's why I'm involved in my neighbor association. That's why I'm involved very heavily with my church. Is if you want to see change, be the change you want to see in the world, right? If you're complaining to the city council about homelessness, maybe go work at Salvation Army for a few times. Or I used to volunteer at the Haven. Like, if you're concerned about homelessness, maybe you should first do some groundwork.
Yeah.
If you're concerned about housing, maybe that's a little bit harder on the normie scale to do. Housing is expensive everywhere. But if you want to solve the problem about gun violence in the city, maybe start doing, go and be a mentor at Abundant Life, or go be a tutor at Buford or CHS, right? Like there's
I agree.
very practical on the ground ways. In a lot of time travel stories, if you go back and you change one thing, the future is
Mhm,
way different, right?
mhm,
You could do that here in the present. You could do
mhm.
something really small that could
Yeah,
change the future dramatically.
yeah, absolutely.
You don't have to be, you don't have to have massive amount of either sci-fi power or political power to make a small change be the snowflake that starts an avalanche.
Yeah, and I think that with local government itself, people are cynical. Um, and I don't know why we're all so cynical. Anthropologists, you're talking about the future, looking back 100 years from now, wondering why Americans became so cynical about their government and their media and their culture and each other. I'm not sure all the reasons for that, but I think that just being a person wherever you are, and this may sound trite and Pollyannish, but being a person wherever you are, like where you work or I work, or choosing to serve on city council, or choosing to be on a board or commission, or whatever, and be a person that's there in that space who's not cynical, who's there to say, there are good things in the world. There's a lot of horrible things in the world, but there are some good things in the world. And right here in this space, we're going to carve out a place where, and we try to do that on city council, where we laugh with each other and we try to keep things light. And hopefully that, hopefully that's something that the city sees.
What have been some misses or regrets that you've had on council? Hindsight is obviously 2020, but what might have you done differently as well?
The one that I'm the most frustrated about is the situation with the unhoused on the downtown mall. My sort of core groups, insofar as I had one, is the downtown business owners. And I was so struck when I first got on council about, even if we wanted to just have a conversation about, for example, don't do your bodily business somewhere, that became, for the activist group, again, putting these big buckets on people, but for those who come from the more activist wing, it was like you couldn't critique that behavior without somehow demeaning the value or the worth of that human being. That's just not true. I mean, we've got to be able to have a place like the downtown mall, or really, I door knocked all over the city to no real effect, but I did. And people all over the city are concerned about the unhoused in their neighborhood. The unhoused are spread all throughout, from the downtown as far, over to, you can go towards Woolen Mills, or you can go closer towards UVA, you can go south. I mean, they just are spread out everywhere. So it's a huge issue. And it just was so hard when we first got on, because we were facing, and this was from people within leadership of some of the organizations that we partner with. Like, you couldn't have an honest conversation, because whenever you went to say, this is something needs to happen about this, immediately be perceived as you were attacking the humanity of the unhoused. I feel like when we move past that, which is a wonderful thing, a lot of the frustration that I end up having is just that I wish things could get done quicker or sooner. And a lot of it has been waiting for Sam. Okay, Sam, this is our strategic plan. This is what we want, but we're going to let you figure out how to get there, because you got
Sam Sanders being
Sam
the
Sanders.
city
Sorry.
manager.
Yeah, sorry about that. And so he's taken the time to try to get to know our partners, try to build relationships, like with the Salvation Army, try to find different opportunities, and it's just taken longer. And I will say, I do think in the next few years there's going to be more concrete, specific action happen, to where we do have more of a solution for the unhoused, though it's always going to be sort of like pushing that just because there's not enough housing in this country, there's not going to be. I do think there will be progress made on this front in the next year and a half. But the thing that people, I don't think fully recognize is, at one point we were talking about putting a shelter over there in Belmont. And I mean, people were not happy about that. Even the idea, the notion of putting one in Fifeville, there are a lot of people who are not happy about that, because they're worried about their kids or whatever. the point I'm trying to make is that that particular issue is so complicated. That has probably been the thing, over the most consistent complaint that we've gotten over the period of time. Like they cleared the encampment underneath the bridge over the course of 6 weeks, and they did it in a very careful and thoughtful way. But we got, on the one hand, people just livid that they were unhoused under there and making a mess. And then
Which bridge?
The free bridge, Pantops Bridge. And then we got criticized from the folks more on the left who were like, well, you're doing all these things, and they were misinformed. We weren't going in there with like arresting people. So that's something that I'm frustrated about and wish I could have made more progress on. I think the other thing that I find frustrating and wish I had made more progress on, and maybe this wasn't really realistic, it's just the relationship between UVA and the community. There really is there's a lot of anger within the community at UVA, while at the same time, everyone knows that the university is the reason why Charlottesville is on the map. Everyone loves the university and respects it at some level, but there's a disconnect, and people want to always sort of blame administration, but it's really the Board of Visitors or the political side of things. And I think some things were making progress, some real progress, and then the FEI building happened where university got it and the city didn't, and people always think there's some sort of conspiracy behind the scenes. I don't think that's the case. That really embittered people. And then with Jim Ryan leaving, so it's, unfortunately,
Yeah, I think there's such a mix there, because it's like UVA sucks when one thing happens, but Jim Ryan gets pushed out.
yeah,
I've met Jim Ryan. I won't speak on his minutia of how he ran the university, but having met him twice, I just got a good vibe from
yeah,
him. He
yeah,
was polite. He remembered my name, which I'm no one to be remembered at his level. But yeah,
yeah,
you've got this dichotomy of like, you have the Federal Executive Institute reversal happened and everyone blames UVA, but then Jim Ryan gets pushed out and then everyone's like really, really sad and really dour about it. It's like, I know you were a philosophy major, or you have a master's or PhD, you have a PhD in it. And, the human brain is very weird where you can hold two
yeah.
contradictory ideas at the same
Yeah,
time. It's just,
that's a really good point. Yeah, cognitive dissonance is just built into who we are. Absolutely. So I think those are the two main things that I wish were different. I mean, these jobs are hard. Being on city council is hard. It's not just the meetings that you go to for council per se, but it's all the boards and commissions that you're on. And then all the reading you have to do. And, I have a full-time job.
and you do it for the pay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I gave the next
Famously, city council staff are paid
18, but it's
very low.
going up to 40. So Jen Fleischer, I got her a pay raise.
All this hardship on city council. Do you think you being an elder at your church has helped you at least navigate in a personal way and be able to see people a little bit better? Like what part of being an elder at your church were you able to bring to shepherding and running a city?
I think, it's a really good question. There's a process that we talk about at our church, and I think other people do as well, called discernment, which I always kind of thought was like a woo-woo sort of, we're going to all discern something together. But really, it's when there's a complicated question that there's not really a clear, straightforward answer, and has a lot of different ramifications. Being able to sort of sit together with a group of people over a period of time and just see how people's feelings evolve about it. I think that has helped me. I think even though I'm, quite liberal, I still hail from the Deep South, and I still hail from this like project management, construction sort of culture. And even getting to know the people in our church, we agree on a lot, but there's definitely cultural differences. And sometimes you don't know that until you get to like a junction point. I think being able to think through those kinds of differences there has helped my work in the city, and vice versa. And it's, I've always felt like with my church that the people there genuinely care for me and my family, knowing that.
Yeah, so similar question. How has your faith and maybe even some of your theological training also influenced how you run
Yeah,
city
so
government or Maybe you have a favorite Bible verse you draw upon in hard times, maybe when someone's accusing you of recording
Yeah.
a conversation.
Yeah. um, I think one of the greatest gifts that Christianity has given our civilization is the notion of agape, loving others unconditionally because you've been loved unconditionally. I think, our society's ostensibly secular in many ways, and that sort of gets built into like, these justice moves and all of this. Well, but really the undergirding is love and loving another person. And again, that sounds trite, but from a theological perspective, the love of God, what that means and what it would mean to me and what it would mean as I live that out among people. So that is something that I try to keep in mind. I think that my faith gives me hope. And sometimes, you talk with folks on both sides of the political aisle. And to me, much of the reason that people are so angry is it's this zero sum game. Like if I don't get my 50.13%, that I'm going to lose. My faith teaches me to have hope, faith, hope, and love, and believing that I don't know what the end is going to look like, but knowing that whatever the end may be, we've got AI or we've got climate change or we've got whatever, there's always another thing. Having a level of hope, ultimately things are going to be okay. That helps me. I have to remind myself of that continually. And my wife would probably say, if she heard me, this, what are you talking about? You don't, you're often, you know, complainy and stuff, but it is something that I believe. And I do feel like oftentimes when people come talk with us on, city council, and they come speak to us or when they email us, they're at a point of hopelessness. And I can't convey everything that I just said to them, but just trying to emulate and model the fact that I do have hope and they should too. I really think that, whatever authentically Christian politics looks like, it somehow has to make sense of the Good Samaritan. Again, that may seem really simplistic, but it's the power of a parable. You can learn more about empathy and ethics and politics and how you should treat people from a simple parable than you can from a dissertation on ethics. So I that's something that I really try to think through, like, what does it mean to reach out to a person who's different than I am and treat them the way I would want to be treated. You've probably heard of Catholic social teaching, Catholic social thought. They have this view called common good, the common good, seeking the common good. That's something that I use as a lens as I'm like, okay, so what does the common good look like for this community? It's more than just street lights and in all the physical things. It's the cultural pieces that tie us together. It's the relationships, that knit us together. And I want to do everything I can to build that up. And that's why sometimes you have to make real financial investments in an infrastructure piece because it helps the overall common good. But you can't lose the fact that ultimately it does come down to people feeling like they belong.
Well, you already mentioned even if you don't get 51% of the vote, how do you feel about Jen Fleischer receiving so much of the primary vote?
Yeah, I
Which
saw
which
that question.
I track politics in this town pretty closely, and I was even surprised she got just that much flat. Pretty astounding.
Yeah, I want to be careful about how I talk about this because it's really easy to get into things that are sort of like reductive paradigms or
I think that might be too big of a word for this podcast.
I don't want to in any way diminish her accomplishment or diminish what she'll do. I will say when I was door knocking, I mean, I had met her a couple times in some meetings. She's not really been that involved politically, but maybe that was an asset for her. I met a lot of people when I was door knocking who just knew her. I've just run into numerous people who say, "Oh yeah, I'm close friends with her," and she delivered our babies. She's a doula and she's a musician, and so there was a wellspring of people that just knew her and loved her as a human and felt like she would be able to, be what they wanted on city council from that sort of perspective. I don't know if this makes sense, but I don't take my loss personally. Like it's personal. It hurts because I wanted to win. I put a lot of time and effort in it, and I felt like I did a good enough job to get reelected. But I don't take it as like a personal rejection by the Democrats. Who knows what would have happened if it would have been in the general election with a more, a less liberal group. I take it as Juan and I and the team that's there have done a good job. We've staunched the bleeding, and we've been rebuilding, and we've gotten it to a certain point, and now the population, the residents want something that looks more like her or has
So
whatever.
are there? She's probably not going to listen to this podcast, but are there any baton pass words of advice you might give to her? And maybe you'll give it to her in person. But
That's a great question. I don't know that I would ever endeavor to give someone a lot of advice about this. I mean, she's clearly has had a good career as a person in public health. I think that will do her well. I think all of us go into these jobs thinking that we'll be able to accomplish more than we're actually able to accomplish. There will end up being hard votes, no matter how much people love you or like you or respect you. There will be votes that are hard. The zoning, for example, the zoning code that we voted on. I mean, those are hard. There's just hard votes, and you're going to disappoint someone or even make someone angry. So, I would just. She probably already knows that. I don't know her that well, but that's what I would tell anyone who is going to get into this line of line of work, because there's some people, I guess, that even at a relatively lower level, like something like city council, that already have all these political, maneuverings they want to make or whatever, and thinking several jobs ahead or whatever. That's not why I got into this. But there's just there's no path forward, because there's always going to be, and one of the things I love about Charlottesville is there's a lot of really intelligent people here. Most of the folks I meet have basically similar values, but how one person who's really super bright, what they deduce from their premises and their values and the conclusion they go with can be so different than their neighbor. Yeah, and so you have really bright people with good values, and can be very assertive, and it's negotiating those that is really what people on city council have to do. So it's not easy. I wish, I sometimes wish that some of the emails that we got, that people just sort of were like, I don't know, give us the benefit of the doubt or something. But all in all, it's been a real honor to serve. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. It's a trust, it's not something that's an expectation. The community trusted me with this for 4 years, and they want someone else to do it. So that'll be great for her and for the city. And I've just learned a lot. You get hinted at this earlier, all the various meetings that you're in. You just get a familiarity, like with Ravenna Water and Sewer, and I'm on that board, and then I'm also on the jail board, or I'm on other. And you just end up seeing how the whole, not just the whole city, but how the whole region works together. I mean, these boards are so crucial because, like the jail board, for example, people in the city do not like anything having to do with jails. They just, in general, that's one way to get people really riled up. I get it. I don't think any one of us do. But when you talk about the costs of running a jail that you have in a partnership with 2 other counties versus the cost of what you'd pay if you manage the jail yourself, there's no comparison. I will say I often feel like Charlottesville is about this close to being ungovernable, because you have such a highly transient, we already talked about how many educated people are here, but a highly transient community. You have students come in. It is very hard to just sort of keep everything where a person's not, a group is not going to just really get upset. Anyway, I hope that, folks who listen to this will know that, these regional partnerships that we have are really important, to support try to believe the best they can about their local politicians, try to reach out, try to participate in a board or commission. You've done that, which is great.
Well, that's a great place to end it. So,
Yeah.
Vice Mayor, thank you so much for joining Church Coffee, and we'll see everyone next week.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Our album art was done by my wife, and our theme music was composed by TJ Stokes.